"Please eat before you leave," she said to the quiet stranger. Then one day he came back to propose. At 8:03 p.m., rain poured over the quiet streets of Alliance, Nebraska. Not the gentle kind, the kind that erased the road ahead and made every storefront disappear behind a curtain of water. Raymond Miller pulled his old pickup onto the shoulder. The engine coughed once, then died. He tried the ignition again. Nothing. He rested both hands on the steering wheel and closed his eyes for a second. Not tonight. The dashboard clock blinked. His phone had almost no battery. The nearest tow truck wouldn't arrive for at least an hour. With a quiet sigh, Raymond grabbed his jacket, locked the truck, and started walking through the rain. A few blocks later, he noticed a small diner with one lonely neon sign still glowing through the storm. Grandma Ellie's Kitchen. The lights inside were warm, the kind of light that reminded people of home. He hesitated, then pushed open the door. A little bell chimed above him. The diner was almost empty. Chairs had already been turned upside down on most of the tables. Fresh coffee still lingered in the air. An elderly woman stood near the counter, wiping down the last table before closing. She looked up and smiled, as if she'd been expecting company all evening. "Come in. You look soaked." Raymond nodded politely. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize you were closing. We're always open for one more person." Her answer came so naturally that he couldn't think of anything to say. He quietly sat at the counter. She handed him a menu. He barely looked at it. "Just a glass of water." She tilted her head. "That's all?" He nodded. "I'm fine." She studied him for only a moment, not in the way people judged, in the way grandmothers noticed things. Without another question, she disappeared into the kitchen. Raymond frowned slightly. A minute later, he heard the gentle sound of a soup ladle against a pot. Then the smell reached him. Chicken, fresh herbs, black pepper, something warm, something familiar. A few moments later, she returned carrying a steaming bowl of chicken soup with thick slices of homemade bread. Raymond immediately stood. "I didn't order this." "I know." He reached for his wallet. She gently pushed his hand back. "No one should drive home hungry. I can pay." She smiled. "I'm not worried about the money. I don't like seeing people leave with empty stomachs." Raymond looked down at the soup, then back at her. "You don't even know me." She chuckled softly. "I know enough. You came in during a storm. You asked for water instead of food. And you look like someone who's been carrying more than rain." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, she nudged the bowl a little closer. "Please eat before you leave." The words were simple, almost ordinary, yet something in her voice reminded Raymond of someone he hadn't heard in years. His mother. He slowly sat back down, picked up the spoon. The first bite was hot enough to warm his entire body. The second reached somewhere much deeper. He finished every last drop, quietly folded a few bills beneath the bowl, thanked her with a small nod, and disappeared back into the rainy night. Neither of them knew that it would be the last bowl of soup Grandma Ellie would ever serve to a stranger. Why would one free bowl of chicken soup bring a quiet stranger back, only to discover he had already arrived too late? Exactly 1 week later, the rain had disappeared. So had the darkness. Spring sunlight stretched across Main Street as Raymond parked outside the same little diner. This time, his truck ran perfectly. He stepped out carrying a neatly folded dish towel. It still smelled faintly of detergent. The night his truck broke down, Grandma Ellie had insisted he dry his jacket before leaving. When he'd tried to return the towel immediately, she'd laughed. "Bring it back next time. There'll always be another bowl of soup waiting." He had smiled politely, but work had taken him out of town the very next morning. Now, he was finally back. He pushed open the diner door. The little bell didn't ring. The door was locked. A white sign hung in the window, "Closed until further notice." Raymond frowned. He looked through the glass. The lights were off. The familiar counter sat empty. Coffee mugs remained neatly stacked exactly where he'd seen them a week ago. Everything looked frozen in time. He glanced toward the neighboring hardware store. An older gentleman was sweeping the sidewalk. "Excuse me." The man looked up. "You know what happened here?" The gentleman rested both hands on the broom. "You didn't hear?" Raymond slowly shook his head. The man sighed. "Ellie passed away. Heart attack." 3 days ago. For a brief second, the entire street seemed strangely quiet. Raymond looked back toward the diner. No, the man nodded sadly. Happened during the night. The whole town came to the funeral. Raymond stared at the folded towel in his hands. He barely knew the woman. They had spoken for perhaps 10 minutes, yet somehow, the news settled heavily in his chest. The hardware store owner smiled gently. Funny thing, she always said she'd rather feed strangers than count money. I guess she spent her whole life proving it. Raymond quietly thanked him, but he didn't leave. Instead, he walked around the side of the diner. Behind the building, someone was carrying boxes toward an old pickup truck. A young woman with her hair tied into a messy ponytail struggled to lift a crate nearly as large as she was. She almost dropped it. Raymond instinctively caught the other side. She jumped. "Oh, I've got it. You don't have to." The box slipped anyway. Several canned tomatoes rolled across the parking lot. The woman groaned. "Perfect. Exactly how my week is going." Raymond bent down to help collect them. She folded her arms suspiciously. "So, which one are you?" He looked confused. "I'm sorry? The real estate agent? The auction guy? The restaurant buyer?" Raymond blinked. "None of those." She narrowed her eyes. "Then, debt collector?" He almost laughed. "No." She pointed toward the diner. "Because if you're here to tell me Grandma owed somebody money, I'm fresh out of patience." Raymond held up both hands. "I think we've misunderstood each other." "I hope so." He reached into his jacket and carefully unfolded the dish towel. "I came back to return this." She stared. "My grandmother's towel?" He nodded. "She lent it to me. The night my truck broke down." The young woman's expression changed, just slightly. "I'm looking for the lady." He glanced toward the dark windows. "Who made chicken soup?" Silence. Then she answered quietly. "She was my grandmother." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally she extended her hand. "I'm Julia. Julia Garner. Raymond. Raymond Miller." She gave a tired smile. "I'm sorry you came back too late." Raymond looked toward the diner. "So am I." He took a slow breath. "I came back." He hesitated. "To thank her." Julia froze. Those 4 words broke something she had been holding together all week. Her eyes immediately filled with tears. She looked away, embarrassed. "I'm sorry. I promised myself I wasn't going to cry today." Raymond remained silent. Julia laughed weakly through the tears. "You know, the whole town came to her funeral. They brought flowers. They told stories." She wiped her eyes. "But nobody came back just to say thank you." Raymond lowered his eyes. "I should have come sooner." Julia shook her head. "No, she would have liked knowing you came at all." The wind gently moved the old diner sign above them. For the first time, Raymond noticed the large soup pot still sitting on the kitchen stove through the back window, as though someone had simply stepped away for a moment. Julia followed his gaze, then quietly said the words she hadn't admitted out loud until now. "I'm going to sell the diner." Raymond looked from the empty kitchen to the old soup pot still resting on the stove. Something about leaving it there didn't feel right, and for reasons he couldn't yet explain, he suddenly wasn't ready to walk away from Grandma Ellie's kitchen. Raymond didn't leave that afternoon. He told himself it was because he still hadn't properly returned the dish towel, or because he felt guilty for arriving too late, or because someone should probably help Julia move the heavy boxes. The truth, he wasn't entirely sure why. He simply stayed. Julia unlocked the back door of the diner again. "I'm only sorting things. You don't have to help." Raymond quietly picked up another box. "I know," she sighed. "You're one of those people." "What people?" "The ones who hear no, and translate it as, 'Please continue.'" A faint smile appeared on Raymond's face. "I've been told that before. I'm not surprised." For the first time since meeting each other, they both laughed. The empty diner suddenly felt a little less empty. While cleaning the kitchen, Raymond couldn't help looking toward the large soup pot still resting on the stove. Julia noticed. "You really liked Grandma's soup." He nodded. "I've been thinking about it all week." She smiled sadly. "Me too." Then she opened an old wooden cabinet and carefully pulled out a thick notebook with faded blue covers. Grandma Ellie's cookbook. Its pages were stained with flour, butter, and years of fingerprints. Julia smiled. Everything she ever cooked is in here. She flipped through dozens of carefully written recipes. Apple pie, chicken pot pie, beef stew, peach cobbler, homemade biscuits. Every recipe had measurements so precise, they almost looked scientific. Raymond leaned closer. She wrote everything down. So she said. Julia turned another page. Chicken soup, there it is. Both of them smiled. This should be easy. It wasn't. 2 hours later, the kitchen looked like it had survived a small explosion. Julia accidentally burned the bread, twice. She measured salt, forgot she'd already measured it. Then added another spoonful. Raymond tasted the soup, immediately reached for his water. Julia covered her face. Tell me. It tastes like the ocean. I knew it. She grabbed the pot dramatically. I'm starting over. Raymond couldn't help laughing. I don't think your grandmother intended soup to preserve fish. Julia pointed the spoon at him. I need encouragement, not honesty. I thought honesty was encouragement. It isn't today. While Julia started another batch, the kitchen faucet suddenly began dripping. Again. Julia groaned. Perfect. It does that every Tuesday. It's Thursday. It gets confused. Raymond quietly rolled up his sleeves. Within 15 minutes, the faucet was fixed. Then he noticed one burner on the old stove wasn't heating properly. 20 minutes later, he fixed that too. Julia watched him tighten the last screw. You repair everything? Almost. What can't you fix? He looked at the coffee machine in the corner. Coffee makers. They hate me. Julia laughed. I finally found your weakness. The following afternoon, Raymond came back. I brought replacement hinges. The pantry door squeaks. I hadn't noticed. I did. The next day, he returned with paint samples, then new light bulbs, then a toolbox. Eventually, neither of them pretended he was only there to fix things anymore. Some days they worked on the diner. Some days they simply sat on overturned stools drinking coffee while talking about absolutely nothing important, without realizing it. Helping Julia had quietly become part of Raymond's routine. One evening, Julia reopened the cookbook. I still don't understand. What? She pointed at the soup recipe. Everything else is ridiculously detailed. She read aloud. 3 cloves of garlic. Exactly 2 teaspoons of thyme. Simmer for 40 minutes. She turned another page. But Grandma's soup. She frowned. It just ends here. Raymond looked down. The final line simply read, Finish with love. Julia stared at the sentence, then dramatically closed the book. No. What? Love is not a measurement. Raymond laughed. It apparently was for her. Julia threw a kitchen towel onto the counter. You can't tell someone to add love. How much? A tablespoon? Half a cup? Raymond tried to stay serious. Maybe 2 cups. Julia pointed at him. You're making fun of me. Only a little. She sighed. I hate mysterious recipes. I think your grandmother liked mysterious people. Julia smiled despite herself. That explains why she liked you. Raymond looked genuinely confused. She met me once. Julia quietly replied. Sometimes once is enough. For reasons neither of them could explain. The kitchen suddenly became very quiet. Later that night, as they sorted through old receipts and recipe cards, Julia discovered a worn leather journal hidden beneath a stack of tablecloths. Unlike the cookbook, this wasn't about food. It was about people. She slowly opened the first page. Every entry was dated. Every entry described someone who had walked through Grandma Ellie's diner. Truck drivers, teachers, teenagers, young couples, widows, soldiers, travelers. She smiled while reading. Grandma remembered everyone. Then, halfway through the journal, Julia suddenly stopped. She recognized the date. The rainy night Raymond had first visited. Her eyes widened. What is it? She looked at him. I think... Grandma wrote about you. Raymond slowly walked over. Julia read aloud. A quiet young man came in tonight. He only asked for water. His clothes were soaked. His eyes were even heavier. Raymond lowered his eyes. Julia continued. If that quiet young man ever comes back, her voice became softer. Please feed him again. She swallowed hard. Then read the final lines. People who only ask for water are usually carrying something much heavier than hunger. The kitchen became completely silent. Julia slowly closed the journal. She looked at Raymond. For the first time, she understood. Grandma hadn't served him soup because he looked poor. She served him because she recognized loneliness. She had spent a lifetime recognizing it. Julia whispered. She knew. Raymond didn't answer. Because he knew she had. A long silence settled between them. Finally Julia asked carefully, "So, was she right?" Raymond looked toward the old soup pot resting quietly on the stove, then back at Julia. He smiled sadly. "No." Julia frowned. "No? I wasn't carrying hunger." She waited. Raymond took a slow breath. "I wasn't carrying hunger at all." He looked down at his hands. "I came back." His voice became almost a whisper. "Not because of the soup." Julia stared at him. If it wasn't the soup, then what had brought him all the way back to Grandma Ellie's little diner? The answer was something he had never told anyone before. Raymond stood quietly beside the kitchen window. Outside, evening settled gently over Alliance. Inside, only the soft sound of the old refrigerator broke the silence. Julia carefully closed her grandmother's journal. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Finally, she looked at him. She knew. Raymond nodded. She always seemed like the kind of person who noticed things. Julia smiled faintly. She noticed everything. Another silence followed. This one felt different. Warmer, safer. Julia gently asked, "So, what were you carrying that night?" Raymond looked down at the coffee mug in his hands. For several seconds, he simply stared into it. Then he quietly began. "My mom passed away 3 years ago." Julia's expression softened immediately. Raymond continued without looking up. "She raised me by herself. We weren't rich, but somehow, there was always dinner." He smiled sadly. "I used to complain about eating the same chicken soup every Sunday." Julia laughed softly. "I bet she'd love hearing that." "I hope not." He smiled. "She'd remind me I complained every single week." The smile slowly disappeared. "When she died, the house became very quiet. I kept working. Long hours. Long drives, gas station sandwiches, microwave dinners, coffee, more coffee." Julia listened without interrupting. "I stopped cooking. I stopped inviting people over. I stopped answering calls." He shrugged gently. "It wasn't that I wanted to be alone. I just forgot how not to be." His voice became almost inaudible. "And nobody asked anymore. Did you eat today?" Julia felt her eyes filling. Raymond looked toward the old soup pot. "Until that rainy night." He smiled through the memory. "Your grandmother didn't feed me." He looked directly at Julia. "She reminded me. I was still worth taking care of." Julia covered her mouth. A tear rolled quietly down her cheek. She had spent her whole life believing Grandma Ellie cooked wonderful soup. Now she realized the soup had never been the miracle. The person serving it was. The following morning, Julia unlocked the diner, not because it was reopening, only because she wanted to hear the old bell above the door ring again. Raymond walked in carrying fresh bread. "I thought we'd practice." Julia looked around. "Practice what?" "Soup." She sighed dramatically. "I admire your optimism. I question your memory. My soup almost poisoned you yesterday. It was memorable. It was salty. Same thing." For the first time in days, the diner echoed with laughter again. They decided to open for one afternoon. Not officially, just a handwritten sign taped to the window. "Soup today, limited menu." The first customer arrived within 15 minutes. Then another. Then 3 more. Julia nervously served the soup. Everyone smiled politely, until one older gentleman carefully put down his spoon. "It isn't Ellie's." Julia's shoulders immediately dropped. "I know." Another customer nodded kindly. "It needs something," Raymond whispered. "Less salt?" Julia elbowed him. "I heard that." Then a little boy, no older than 8, took one bite. He looked at Julia honestly and said, "My grandma's is better." The diner became completely silent. The boy's mother looked horrified. "I'm so sorry." But Julia suddenly laughed. Raymond laughed too. The little boy blinked. "What?" Julia smiled. "You're probably right." The entire diner burst into warm laughter. Even the little boy grinned. For the first time, failing didn't feel embarrassing. It felt human. That evening, Julia leaned against the counter. "We're never going to make her soup." Raymond nodded. "No," she sighed. So what do we do? He looked around the little diner, the old photographs, the worn wooden booths, the familiar window where Grandma Ellie always waved goodbye. Then he quietly asked, "What if people weren't coming here for the soup?" Julia frowned. "What do you mean?" He pointed toward the front door. "Think about everyone who came in today. They smiled before they even tasted the food. They knew your grandmother. They weren't looking for perfection. They were looking for—" He searched for the right word. Her. Julia slowly looked around the empty diner. Then she remembered something. Grandma never rushed anyone. She always sat with widowers who had nobody to talk to, always gave free pie to teenagers after football games. She always remembered birthdays. Suddenly, everything made sense. Grandma Ellie had never sold chicken soup. She had served the feeling of being welcomed home. Julia whispered, "I've been trying to copy the recipe, when I should have been copying her heart." Raymond smiled. "I think that's much harder." "It is, but probably more important." The next afternoon, as Raymond repaired one of the old shelves in the kitchen, he decided to clean behind the enormous soup pot that had sat untouched since Grandma Ellie's last day. He carefully lifted it. Something thin slipped onto the counter, a folded piece of yellowed paper. "Julia?" She looked up. "What is it?" "I think this was hidden here." She slowly unfolded it. Only 2 handwritten sentences appeared. Nothing else. Just Grandma Ellie's familiar handwriting. The recipe was never the soup. Julia swallowed, then read the second line aloud. It was making sure nobody ate alone. The words seemed to fill the entire kitchen. Raymond closed his eyes. Julia looked toward the empty dining room. For the first time, they finally understood. Grandma hadn't been protecting a recipe. She had been protecting an idea, and ideas were meant to be shared, not hidden. Julia carefully placed the note back inside the cookbook. "This stays." Raymond nodded. "It belongs here." That night, after locking the diner, Raymond checked his phone. A new email waited. Urgent transfer notice. He opened it. His expression slowly changed. Julia immediately noticed. "What happened?" Raymond forced a small smile. "My company's opening a new regional office." She smiled. "That's good, isn't it?" He quietly turned the screen toward her. "Denver, Colorado. Report within 4 days." Julia read the message twice. Neither of them spoke. Outside, the lights of Grandma Ellie's diner reflected softly against the dark Nebraska street. For the first time since they had met, both of them wondered the same painful question. What happens when the person who helped you find your way home has to leave? The transfer paperwork sat folded inside Raymond's jacket pocket. He hadn't signed it. He hadn't torn it up either. For 3 days, it traveled everywhere with him. To the diner, to the construction site, back to his apartment. Every time he reached into his pocket, he felt the edge of the envelope. Every time he looked at Julia, the decision became harder. Neither of them mentioned Denver again. It wasn't because they had forgotten. It was because saying it out loud would make it real. Instead, they spent those last few days exactly the way they had spent the weeks before, replacing old chairs, painting faded window frames, sorting through Grandma Ellie's recipe cards. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they worked in comfortable silence. Some silences didn't need fixing. One afternoon, Julia stood on a stool trying to reach the top shelf where Grandma used to keep the large soup pot. "I've got it." Raymond stepped closer. "I can reach." "I know." She stretched a little farther anyway. "I almost have it." "You definitely don't." "I absolutely—" The heavy pot slipped. "Oh." Raymond caught it just before it hit the floor. The pot survived. A large bowl of flour sitting beside it did not. A white cloud exploded across the kitchen. Flour covered the counter, the floor, Raymond's shirt, Julia's hair, even the old clock on the wall. For 2 full seconds, neither of them moved. Julia slowly looked down at herself, then at Raymond. "You look like an uncooked biscuit." Raymond glanced at her face. A streak of flour crossed the end of her nose. "I was about to say exactly the same thing." She laughed. "You were not." "I was. You were going to say I looked ridiculous." "You do." She grabbed a dish towel. He ducked. She missed completely. The towel landed on a customer who had just walked through the front door. Everyone froze. The elderly man picked up the towel, looked at the two flour-covered adults, then smiled. "I'll come back in 5 minutes. I think your kitchen is having a family meeting." As the door closed behind him, Julia burst into laughter. Raymond couldn't help joining her. It was the kind of laughter that arrived after weeks of carrying things too heavy to name. The evening before Raymond was supposed to leave, the diner was unusually quiet. Most of the tables had already been cleaned. The windows reflected the soft orange glow of sunset across Main Street. Julia turned the sign from open to closed. When she looked back, Raymond was sitting at the counter, exactly where he had sat the first night. He smiled gently. "I'd like to order." Julia folded her arms. "Oh?" He nodded. "A glass of water." For a brief second, she simply stared at him. Then she smiled. A smile filled with understanding. Without saying another word, she walked into the kitchen. Raymond listened to familiar sounds. A soup ladle, a pot gently simmering, bread being sliced, a bowl placed carefully on the counter. Moments later, Julia returned carrying a steaming bowl of chicken soup. She placed it in front of him exactly the way Grandma Ellie once had. Raymond looked at the bowl, then at her. She smiled softly. "Please eat before you leave." His eyes immediately became wet. He looked down for a moment, gathering himself, then picked up the spoon. The first bite wasn't perfect. It still wasn't exactly Grandma Ellie's recipe. Maybe the carrots were a little softer. Maybe the herbs were slightly different. Maybe the broth needed another pinch of pepper. None of it mattered, because somehow, it still felt like coming home. Julia watched quietly from the other side of the counter. Neither of them spoke while he finished the meal. When Raymond reached the last spoonful, he smiled. "It's still not exactly hers." Julia laughed. "I know. But," he looked at the empty bowl, "it made me feel exactly the same." She blinked. "What do you mean?" He looked around the diner. "The soup isn't what changed. The person serving it did." Julia's eyes filled with tears. Raymond placed the spoon carefully beside the bowl. He stood, picked up his jacket. Julia's smile faded just a little. "So, I guess this is goodbye." Raymond nodded once. "It might be." He walked toward the front door. One step, then another. His hand reached the doorknob. Julia looked away before he could see the tears gathering in her eyes. She told herself not to stop him. He had a future, a career, dreams. She had no right to ask him to stay. The bell above the door never rang. Instead, she heard slow footsteps coming back toward her. She looked up. Raymond stood in front of the counter again. He reached into his jacket, pulled out the transfer paperwork. Without a word, he tore it cleanly down the middle. Then again, and one more time, the pieces drifted gently onto the countertop. Julia stared at them, then at him. Raymond smiled. "I finally figured out why your grandmother never wrote down the recipe." Julia's voice was barely above a whisper. "Why?" He stepped closer. "So many people think recipes are about ingredients." He shook his head, but hers never was. He looked into her eyes. "Because you can't write down the person you're supposed to share it with." Julia couldn't stop the tears anymore. She laughed softly through them. "You really took your time figuring that out." "I know. I'm a slow learner. But," he gently reached for her hand, "I think your grandmother was very patient." Julia intertwined her fingers with his. "I think she was too." Outside, the lights of Alliance slowly came on as evening settled across the town. Inside the little diner, neither of them felt like they were waiting for something anymore. They had already found it. Several months later, every evening, the lights of Grandma Ellie's kitchen glowed warmly against the quiet streets of Alliance. A brand new wooden sign hung beneath the original one. "Please eat before you leave." Customers smiled the moment they walked in. Most of them didn't even know the story behind the words. They only knew they felt welcome. Every first-time visitor received a small complimentary bowl of chicken soup, and whenever someone quietly ordered only a glass of water, Julia disappeared into the kitchen. She always came back carrying soup, just as Grandma Ellie once had. One afternoon, a little boy watched her set a steaming bowl in front of a truck driver. He tugged gently on her sleeve. "Why do you give people free soup?" Julia looked across the diner. Raymond was repairing a loose chair near the window. He glanced up and smiled. Julia smiled back before answering. "Because Someone once taught us that the best recipes are the ones people remember with their hearts. The little boy nodded, even if he didn't fully understand. Maybe one day he would. Above the counter, Grandma Ellie's old wooden spoon rested inside a simple frame. Beneath it were the words she had lived by. Food fills the stomach. Kindness fills the road home. Warm yellow light spilled onto the sidewalk. Just then, a weary traveler stepped inside, dripping rainwater onto the floor. He looked at the menu, then quietly said, "Just a glass of water." Julia smiled, turned toward the kitchen, and reached for the soup pot. Sometimes the meal people remember forever isn't the one that filled their stomach, but the one that reminded them they were never alone. Some people spend their whole lives searching for the perfect recipe, the perfect career, the perfect home, or even the perfect relationship. But Grandma Ellie quietly reminded us that the most meaningful things in life can never be measured with cups or teaspoons. Kindness has no exact amount. Compassion has no secret ingredient, and love rarely arrives the way we expect it to. Raymond thought he came back looking for a bowl of soup. Julia believed she was trying to save her grandmother's diner. In the end, they discovered that what they were really preserving wasn't a recipe at all. It was a way of making people feel seen, welcomed, and cared for. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give another person isn't advice, money, or even the perfect words. Sometimes it's simply letting them know they don't have to face another meal or another day alone. Before you go, we'd love to hear from you in the comments. If someone remembered you years from now, would they remember what you cooked, what you built, or how you made them feel when they needed kindness the most? If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories and join us for more uplifting romances. Thank you for sharing this story with us. Until next time, may you never underestimate the power of offering someone a seat at your table, because one warm meal, one genuine conversation, or one simple act of kindness may become the beginning of a completely different life.